Hey, hello and welcome to this new video. I have an interview today with a guy named Kevin Giguère, and Kevin Giguère is the founder of Dragon Slumber, and he made a game named Arelite Core. Yeah, well, I think Kevin is perfectly fine introducing himself. So here he goes.
Sure. My name is Kevin Giguère. I'm the founder of Dragon Slumber, and as you've said, I worked on Arelite Core. I was the designer, the programmer. I wrote my own engine for it. I wrote the script for it. I did all of the production. Basically, I did all of the game except for everything which is visual and all of the music and sound effects.
Is Arelite Core the first game you made?
Arelite Core is the first big game I've made. A few years ago, I worked for a small studio. We did flash games, kind of promotional flash games for websites like Disney and Nickelodeon to promote various cartoons. So I was a programmer back then, but this is my first big production, my first. Especially working alone, writing the entire engine, designing the thing, and publishing it as well. So yeah, it was definitely a very different experience moving from those flash games, which took about 3 weeks to a month to complete, and Arelite Core, which took nearly 5 years to do.
So it took you 5 years to make Arelite Core.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't. I didn't intend to make Arelite Core in such a long time, but I guess as the project moved forward and as I understood what the game was, and games are. I find that as you work on a game, when you start working on a game, you have this idea of what the game is going to be, but over time, the idea gets more precise, and you learn some things about what the game is, what works, what doesn't, and I definitely greatly underestimated all of that work that went into the game, especially since Arelite Core is such a big game too. It ended up being about 20 to 25 hour JRPG. And at one point during development, I thought it was going to take about 8 hours to complete. So it's actually more than twice what I anticipated. And as you might expect, that also means that it's a lot more work to get completed.
For what platforms have you developed Arelite Core?
So Arelite Core was made for Windows PC. It was, like I mentioned previously, I created the engine myself, which is to say I programmed the entire thing from bottom to top with C# and XNA. For those who don't know, XNA is this platform that Microsoft provided back a few years when people were releasing games, indie games on Xbox 360 through their Xbox Indie Game, I don't remember what it stands for, but Xbox Live Indie Games. They were using XNA to program their games, and that framework is what I use for Arelite Core as well, which enabled me to produce the game fairly quickly, but it also meant that the game was not compatible for other platforms, including the Xbox One, since Microsoft has since moved away from XNA.
So this means that it is impossible to port the game to other platforms right now.
Yes, exactly. And there is a possibility to convert the engine to other platforms as well through a framework called Monogame, which is kind of similar to XNA, so I wouldn't have to rewrite the entire engine, but it's definitely a lot of work, so I have to see how well Arelite Core is going to do, and if if it's worth investing the amount of time that it would take to port to other platforms as well, and see the interest level from other people.
So how do you like each platform, like consoles and PC and mobile?
I always was a fan of the PC because of how open it is, how easy it is to, anyone can make a game on PC and even on Mac and even on Linux. Anyone can make games and publish them and make them available to everyone. You of course have Steam Greenlight, which sadly is going away, but that's one venue where you could post your games. There's also Itch and Humble Bundle, so there's just a lot of accessibility there. You don't have a gatekeeper keeping people in and out. On consoles, consoles are perhaps more focused, so if you create a game for consoles, there is a gatekeeper. Sony and Microsoft try to, and Nintendo with the Switch now out, try to keep try to have a certain level of quality control for games. It also limits the amount of games, so not everyone who would like to publish games on those platforms can. There are some advantages and some disadvantages. On one hand, fewer games means you probably have more polished games overall, and it really helps for visibility for those indie games. Whereas on PC, anyone can publish, but that also means that there's a lot of noise, and it's very hard for consumers could hear about 1,000 games in a day, because that's just the reality of how many indie games there are nowadays.
A lot of games get released on Steam every single day. I once counted it and kept track for a few weeks, and I came to an average of 25 to 30 every single day. Well, the weekends are a bit less, but it's somewhere around that.
25 to 30 on Steam? Yeah, that sounds about right. I know that I think in 2012 there were about 2,000 games on Steam, something like that. And at some point the floodgates opened and Steam ended up doubling the number of games available every year, basically. So last year in 2016, I believe they released something like 16,000 games, which is absolutely massive. And when that many games, obviously not everyone is going to be able to bubble to the top and get noticed. Even at that point, it becomes a matter of you really need to, it's not enough to be a good game. You also need to fall in the eye of the players and be able to get noticed in order to get played.
So, what type of education have you done?
So, first of all, I'm 34 years old, so I do have a lot of past, let's say. I have a college degree in computer sciences, which I completed in the early 2000s. And afterwards, I worked for 3 years as a programmer for Flash games. We were a small company that developed promotional games, basically. Promotional games for companies like Disney and Nickelodeon. So, learning, a lot of that learning ended up being on the spot. As far as design, game design, I've watched a lot of YouTube, I've read a lot of books. For me, game design has always been a passion. I love to put that puzzle together, that puzzle of a good game design. And as many games as there are on the market, it kind of shows how different people can come to different solutions for the same types of games. You could have a first-person shooter, but you could do a first-person shooter in 1,000 different ways, and some of them are really interesting, and some of them are not. And I think it's one of those things that I really love, to look at at those game designs and say, okay, what can I do better? And it's kind of what I did with Arelite Core, really. When I started Arelite Core, I looked at other JRPGs and I was looking at how can I improve this formula? What works in the traditional JRPG formula and what doesn't? And that's kind of how I ended up fashioning the combat system, which was inspired by fighting games. So there's a combo system, there's some stun, there's some blitz, which you build up every turn, which acts like a super meter. And all of that together really came from just, observing the successes and failures of, not failures, the strengths and weaknesses of other systems and figuring out how it can work on my game. So I don't have an official game design credentials as far as going to school for game design specifically. My background is more in programming, but I definitely spent a lot of time over the years just learning that and trying to make the best, figure out what makes the best game designs and trying to apply that.
How many people worked on Arelite Core?
Overall, I would say that about 20 people have worked on Arelite Core. So as I mentioned, I did the programming, the design, the production, hiring people, the marketing, all that stuff. But when it comes to the art, that is definitely not in my skill set. So I did hire a lot of people. And as I mentioned, the game is really big. It takes about 25 hours to complete. And there's a lot of variety, a lot of different characters, different environments, 100 different animated monsters. And yeah, over the course of 4 years, I hired around 20 different artists, about a third of which worked on the animated monsters alone because of how detailed those were. So it definitely was a lot of people, and not all of those people were working at once. Some people were, some people had to part ways during development for various reasons. And for the sound, even the soundtrack, I think Arelite Core has an amazing soundtrack, stylized in the SNES fashion. So there are 30 different pieces in the soundtrack, and that was composed by Hugh Holton, who made a few other video games as well. But he's kind of a generalist composer, and I think we worked together over the course of a year or so making that soundtrack. So quite a lot of work, and quite a lot of artists, and I think that's one of the things that people that is easy to forget when you're working on games. It's easy to think, oh, you need to work on the art, you need to work on the programming, all of that stuff. But it's easy to forget how much work it is to manage a team as well, and making sure that people are, that the work that they're producing works for your game, that it's properly formatted. When people leave, you need to hire new people, and that's very time consuming, and I think that is partially why this game ended up taking as long as it did. I definitely underestimated the time it takes to do all of that.
You said before you fully scripted Arelite Core yourself. Why didn't you choose for an engine like Unreal or Unity?
So I did in fact create the engine myself, and the reason why is because in 2012 there weren't many good. I couldn't find any 2D engines which I really liked that I felt could do everything that I wanted Arelite Core to do. So Arelite Core is a JRPG, and a lot of people will have heard of RPG Maker, which makes that style of game. And I believe over time, RPG Maker now has more scripting ability. It's a lot more free than it used to be. But back then, it was a little bit more limited, and I really built Arelite Core from the ground up. Like, I didn't. Although I did look to other games for inspiration, I didn't take anything for granted. The combat system is very different from any other game. A lot of time was put into polishing that. Anything that's a menu, and yeah, by having made my own engine, that process becomes a little bit easier, I think. Just to know that you're not stuck with you don't have any preconceived notions, since you do have to create everything. So when I started creating any aspect of the game, I was forced to ask myself, is this good for my game? Should I change it? And I ended up questioning everything and tried to make try to approach things a little bit differently than a lot of other traditional games. And I think it did help overall. It did add definitely a lot of variety. For instance, a lot of the levels that I created, a lot of the dungeons are very interactable. You know, I have some bridges that turn. I have some. I have a section that is kind of mirrored, which is kind of special. I really try to add a twist to every level to make it stand out just a little more. And I think that by having my own engine, a lot of that was simplified to implement those design decisions.
But wouldn't it be easier if you used an engine like Unreal or Unity?
So those are great points, but we are talking about 2012. Nowadays, Unity, I think, is great for 2D. I think they've done a lot of work in the last year or so, last year to 2 years. They've done a lot of work to really make it more accessible as far as 2D goes. But if you go back 5 years, Unity worked well for 3D, but not as well for 2D, and that's kind of why I didn't go for that in that direction. And it's the same for Unreal as well. A lot of the decisions that I took were because of the context. We are talking about a time before the Xbox One, before the PlayStation 4, so it was in fact in development for quite some time. And I don't regret having made my own engine, but for future games, I definitely would rather use Unity and rather use tools that are already available, because it will save a lot of time and it does add a lot of flexibility for sure.
Isn't it hard to create your own engine?
Yeah, the engine is actually 45 to 50,000 lines of code. So I would say that over the course of that 4 to 5 years, I've probably spent maybe a year and a half working on the engine, and the rest was more about developing the game itself, I'd say.
What was the biggest challenge in producing Arelite Core?
I would say it was probably hiring people, and again, that was something that was really, to some extent, a little bit surprising to me. When I started the project, I intended to team up with another artist and kind of work together towards this big JRPG, and it didn't work out, so I did have to work on my own in the end. And I didn't realize how much, for some reason, I expected to find pixel art artists fairly easily, but as it turned out, it did become very difficult to find them to the level of quality of what I was looking for. So that definitely took a time. It was very much a learning process, finding the people who worked properly on the project and those who didn't. I would say that another matter, which wasn't exactly a challenge at that time, but was very unexpected, is the money. When I started working on Arelite Core, I expected it to cost around $20,000, and in the end it ended up costing over $50,000, so it's a lot more expensive, and that all came out of my pocket. So it was a lot more expensive than I thought, and there were a few reasons for that. As time went on, artists ended up costing more than I expected. I'm in Canada, so all of my money is in Canadian dollars, but my contracts are in American. And over the years, the Canadian dollar fell, so payments at the end of the development cycle were like 30% more expensive than when I started. So a lot of those things kind of came together to make the game a lot more expensive than I expected. Definitely.
So making Arelite Core had a really high price tag for you. Why didn't you choose something like crowdfunding for Arelite Core?
It kind of became this thing where when it kind of creeps up on you. So it's not an upfront $60,000. It's like, okay, now I'm paying 500 here, 500 here, and it kind of builds up over time where I did have a full-time job that was kind of providing the money for this project as well, which definitely, I mean, I couldn't have made it without that. And I did look into crowdfunding, but crowdfunding is also a lot of management. It's a lot of, you can get a lot of money out of it, but it is definitely a lot of management. And I wasn't sure that the amount of time that was required to get it to a successful completion was worth that time. Like, for instance, if I ask for $10,000, let's say, well, after Kickstarter takes its cut and this and that, there are perks that you need to pay out, and obviously those also come out of your sales, so you actually end up making not as much as it seems, and it felt, and then you also need to promote the Kickstarter, because that's another field where there's a lot of competition and a lot of people starting up projects. So I ended up looking at all of that, and I decided that instead of spending my time managing a Kickstarter and promoting a Kickstarter and whatnot, I would rather work on the game, and I would rather spend that time programming and designing and making sure that the game itself is better.
Did you get any help from the industry to develop and promote your game?
In a way, yes. I mean, it is I love the game, the indie game industry. I think there are a lot of great people here, and it's not that competitive an industry. We all want to see each other succeed. We all want to see great games coming out into the world, and I definitely got a lot of help for testing, for instance, getting insight into what I was doing. I also had a friend who ended up polishing a few of the graphics that were, a lot of the early graphics were a bit rough around the edges. The faces looked a bit weird, so he ended up putting a lot of work into that, to adding shadows, adding a few things to add depth and to make the game stand out a little bit more. So definitely, definitely couldn't have done it without done it as well, let's say, without the industry, for sure.
Did you notice the decline for making money for indie games in this industry?
Yes, well, there are a lot more indie games coming out, and I think at this point there are probably more games coming out compared to the number of players coming in. So it does make sense that games are make a lot less money. I'm not gonna lie, Arelite Core right now isn't doing super well as far as sales go. It is struggling quite a bit, and I think it just is telling how many games come out and how many great games are coming out. So everyone is kind of struggling for that spotlight. It is definitely difficult, and I think overall, if I had something to say to devs, it's that you probably, unless you have something really special that everyone connects with, something like Shovel Knight, for instance, or Undertale, you really need to be able to say, okay, well, my first game did not do great at launch, but it's not over. You know, that game is still out, it's still available, people can go out there and buy it, and there's going to be sales, and there's going to be humble bundles, and you can also get yourself better known through the games that you'll release afterwards. Right now I'm working on Astral Traveler, which is a kind of a racing obstacle avoiding hybrid, yeah, I'm hoping that by releasing more games, and especially less costly and shorter games, I can make this business somewhat profitable. And hopefully Arelite Core sales will pick up as more people discover it as well.
Why didn't you choose to hire someone for the marketing?
I would say that I mostly did it on my own. I for a moment I did try to find help promoting the game, but it didn't really pan out. So yeah, I tried to contact people as much as possible, contacting media. I went to PAX East last year in 2016. I started streaming on Twitch. I did an AMA on Reddit. I did quite a bit of work, and some of it worked out, some of it did not work out as well. Yeah, it's promoting a game is a full-time job in itself, and when you have so many other full-time jobs as well, it does become quite difficult to do. So yeah, that's actually another great point, though. One of the reasons why working on a game alone is so difficult, it's not just the work on the game, but also getting the word out about the game, which is so much work.
So, what type of games do you play in your free time?
Right now, I'm because I work so much, I don't have time for long-form games, so I couldn't play something that is ironically, I couldn't get into a JRPG myself because those games tend to be really long and you need to get really invested, and I love them, I just don't have the time to do so. So I play stuff like, right now I'm playing Just Cause 3, which I love because you pop into the game and then you do a mission and you drop right back out. So you can play for like 10 and 15 minutes and you never really miss a beat because of the style of the game. So I try to play quick, arcadey, intense games, I would say, right now.
I'm completely out of questions. Do you want to say anything else?
I would just say, I mean, obviously, I would love people to go check out Arelite Core. As I've mentioned, I have worked on it for so long, and I really hope that people can go out there, try it out, and I'm hoping that you'll love it. It's available on Steam. You'll be able to find more details at www.arelitecore.com. I'm sure you will be providing a link to that somewhere. All right, there you go. And I guess I want to thank you as well for the interview. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you for watching. All the links for Arelite Core are in the description below. And yeah, I will see you next time. Goodbye.